In demographic economics, the relationship between parental death and a child's human capital is well documented. Across various datasets, we see correlations between the loss of a parent and shifts in a child's schooling or labor participation. But identifying how much of that shift is a direct result of the death itself is a significant methodological hurdle. The problem is endogeneity. Unobserved factors like wealth and ambition influence both the risk of parental death and the child's success. For prolonged illnesses, behavioral shifts, like leaving school to provide care, happen well before the death occurs. The baseline data is already compromised. To achieve causal identification, economists need specific conditions: an entirely unanticipated mortality shock, combined with longitudinal tracking, beginning before the event occurs. Without these conditions, cross-sectional data cannot separate the impact of the death from the socioeconomic environment that preceded it. Standard observational models struggle to isolate the causal effect. On December 26, 2004, the Sumatra Andaman earthquake generated a tsunami that struck the coast of Indonesia. It was an event with no modern precedent in the region. Mainland Sumatra had not experienced a tsunami in over 600 years, and no early warning systems were in place. Because the disaster was unanticipated, survival was largely dictated by idiosyncratic factors, where a person happened to be standing and the specific topography of the coastline. This allows researchers to bypass the selection biases found in deaths caused by illness or predictable hazards. The impact on the next generation was widespread. Among children aged 9 to 18 in Aceh, approximately 10,000 lost one parent, and 4,400 lost both. The study of the Tsunami Aftermath and Recovery, or STAR, provides the data for this natural experiment. 10 months before the tsunami, a representative survey captured the socioeconomic status of these families. Researchers then tracked the same children annually for 5 years, following them through displacement camps and into new living arrangements to see how their trajectories evolved. This combination, a geographically random shock and a pre-existing longitudinal panel, creates a window to measure the specific costs of orphanhood. Researchers begin with a standard regression measuring child outcomes against the death of a parent, controlling for observable characteristics. For causality, the unobserved error term must be uncorrelated with parental death, assuming future orphans and non-orphans were identical. We test this by looking at baseline data from before the tsunami. If true, there should be no significant differences between the groups before the disaster. The data shows the assumption is incorrect. Before the tsunami, future orphans were older and had over a year more education. Survival was also gendered. Males had an 11.3% survival advantage, likely because men in Aceh knew how to swim. Because future orphans and survivors showed these differences at baseline, the regression's error term is correlated with the death event. Therefore, the standard OLS estimate is completely biased. To remove baseline biases, we move to a child fixed effects model, adding a variable for traits specific to each child. This variable, mu-I, captures unchanging traits, subtracting out the differences identified in the baseline data. It controls for a child's inherent ability, their genetic advantages, and the pre-disaster ambitions of the parents and the child. By measuring changes in the child's life against their specific pre-disaster baseline, Equation 2 identifies the impact of parental death on a trajectory. Applying this model to the data 5 years after the tsunami, the impact on older children, aged 15 to 17, is substantial. For older males, losing a father leads to a 1-point-to-me-year drop in completed schooling and a 34% decline in enrollment. The mechanism is a shift in roles. Household data shows these boys transitioned into the labor force early, taking over as household heads. For older females, the loss of both parents creates a different set of consequences. These double orphans face a 55 percentage point decline in school enrollment and a 62 percentage point increase in marriage rates compared to their peers. This was driven in part by changes in the marriage market. Because mortality was higher among adult women, surviving men were remarrying quickly, and orphaned girls were entering adult roles much earlier than they otherwise would have. The data indicates that losing a parent forces adolescents into survival roles, leading them to leave school to manage a shattered household. Looking at younger children, aged 9 to 14, shows why timing is critical when measuring the effects of a disaster. 1 year after the tsunami, these children appeared resilient. Their school enrollment rates were stable, and sometimes even higher than children whose parents had survived. This was largely due to a significant influx of humanitarian aid. NGOs provided targeted scholarships specifically for orphans to keep them in school during the initial recovery. But most of these programs were temporary, often lasting only a year or two. As that support system ended, the underlying reality of the loss began manifesting in the data. 5 years out, the trend reverses. For younger girls who lost both parents, school enrollment drops by 51 percentage points, and labor force entry increases by 24%. Short-term humanitarian metrics can be misleading. The actual economic cost of orphanhood often emerges on a delay, becoming visible only through longitudinal tracking. The STAR data allows us to map the specific ways orphanhood alters life paths. Older boys move into labor, older girls move into marriage. Across all groups, double orphans, those who lost both parents, represent the most significant loss in human capital. These findings update our understanding of parental loss. Historically, research from the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Africa has identified maternal death as the primary driver of poor outcomes for children, with paternal loss having less impact. The ACE data suggests this is not universal. In family structures where fathers are highly involved in the household, the loss of a father can have economic consequences for older boys that are as severe as the loss of a mother. This identification is possible only because of the unanticipated nature of the tsunami and the use of fixed effects models. These methods expose the specific, delayed penalties that remain hidden in standard data. Humanitarian aid often addresses the immediate, visible shock of a disaster, but the econometric evidence shows that the deepest costs of orphanhood are structural, impacting life trajectories